In the far reaches of the galaxy, on the planet Kivorish, lived a species known for their unmatched hunting skills. These creatures, tall and sleek with shimmering green skin and glowing eyes, were not just predators. They were the galaxy's greatest hunters. Among them, Vexerathkor stood out. With her dark green scales that shimmered in the light and her piercing yellow eyes, she had earned a reputation for being merciless, precise, and cunning. Vexera was one of the most skilled huntresses in her species, her name whispered with both awe and fear across many worlds. Now she had come to Earth, lured by the rumors of a challenge unlike any other. The humans, though physically weaker than her species, were known for their adaptability and determination to survive against the odds. They were often seen as prey in the eyes of the Kivorish, but Vexera did not see them as simple game. She saw an opportunity to prove her skill, to hunt a species that could fight back. The human she had chosen was a man named Jace Winters, a former soldier with a reputation for surviving even the most brutal of environments. He was known for being elusive, for always finding a way out of dangerous situations. Vexera had studied him before she arrived on Earth, and she knew that the hunt would be no easy task. She had already tracked many creatures across the stars, but never had she faced someone like Jace. He was strong, resourceful, and unpredictable, traits that made him a worthy opponent. As Vexera descended to the thick forests of North America, she activated her cloaking device, rendering her invisible to the naked eye. Her sharp senses, enhanced by her species' advanced biology, allowed her to track Jace with ease. The forest was dense, filled with towering trees and thick underbrush, but she moved through it silently, her steps nearly undetectable. She was a shadow, a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She knew Jace was out there somewhere, and it wouldn't be long before she found him. Vexera admired the terrain, so different from her home planet. The wildness of Earth fascinated her, as did the way humans interacted with their environment. Jace, she knew, was no stranger to these woods. He had spent years surviving in harsh conditions, and that would give him an advantage. But Vexera was confident in her abilities. She had the technology of her people at her disposal, gear that could render her invisible, weapons that could slice through the toughest of hides, and a mind sharpened by years of training. As she silently moved through the forest, she couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. This hunt would be a challenge, yes, but that only made it more thrilling. She relished the thought of facing the human so capable, someone who would force her to push her limits. The tables would turn, she knew, but not until she decided it was time. Jace Winters wouldn't know what hit him. For the first few days, Vexera followed Jace silently through the thick forests, taking pleasure in the challenge of staying hidden from his sharp eyes. She was an expert at remaining unseen, and Jace, though highly trained, had no idea that a deadly huntress was tracking his every step. The forest seemed endless, a maze of trees and underbrush that could swallow a man whole. But Vexera was patient, moving with the grace of a shadow, never rushing. She had learned to be quiet, to observe before striking. She took her time, studying Jace's habits, his movements, the way he used the landscape to his advantage. It wasn't just his skills that intrigued her, but his determination. Jace was a survivor. He could sense when something was wrong, when danger was near, and he trusted his instincts. Vexera knew this would make the hunt more interesting. As each day passed, Jace began to notice strange occurrences. He would hear a branch snap in the distance or feel the eerie silence that suddenly blanketed the woods. At first, he dismissed these feelings, chalking them up to the normal sounds of the forest. But soon, he started to wonder if something was watching him. On the third day, he set up camp near a river, making sure to leave a few signs behind, hoping to lure out whatever, or whoever, was following him. He set a simple trap, a loose net made from thick vines and branches, thinking it might help him catch whatever predator was lurking nearby. He had no idea that it wasn't just any animal stalking him, but something far more dangerous. As night fell, Jace heard the sound of light footsteps. The rustling of leaves was so faint it could have been the wind, but Jace knew better. He froze, his senses on high alert. He wasn't alone. There was something out there, watching, waiting. The air was thick with tension. He carefully checked the trap he had set, ensuring everything was in place. His fingers grazed the smooth surface of a sharp rock he had sharpened earlier, preparing for whatever threat might appear. He had learned to think quickly, to stay calm in the face of danger. Jace was no stranger to this feeling. Being hunted was something he knew all too well. But what unnerved him was the absence of any visible enemy. It was as if he was being stalked by an invisible force. Vexara, concealed by her advanced cloaking device, watched with admiration as Jace worked. She had studied his every move, and now she saw how clever he was. His trap was simple, but it was effective. He was a survivor, someone who knew how to read the land and make use of everything around him. Vexara couldn't help but respect his skill. However, she wasn't ready to strike yet. Instead, she took a step back, observing, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal herself. Jace's sharp instincts told him he was being followed, but he couldn't see his pursuer. He stayed alert, scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. Hours passed, and the forest remained still. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the occasional chirp of a nocturnal creature in the distance. But still, Jace felt it, the sensation of eyes on him. As dawn approached, Jace decided to move. He couldn't remain in one place for too long. The Huntress would be watching, waiting for an opportunity. And Jace, though he didn't know who or what his stalker was, wasn't about to make it easy for her. The chase had only just begun. As the days went on, Vexara began to grow more impressed with Jace's skills. The human was proving to be far more difficult to catch than she had anticipated. She had expected him to make mistakes, to panic, but he didn't. Jace adapted to every challenge with a calmness that seemed unnatural for someone in his position. Vexara watched him carefully as he made his way deeper into the forest, setting traps of his own, using the landscape to his advantage. Every time she thought she had him cornered, Jace slipped away, vanishing like a ghost into the wilderness. It frustrated Vexara, but it also excited her. This was no ordinary human. His survival instincts were sharp, and he seemed to anticipate her every move. On the fourth day of the hunt, Vexara noticed something that truly surprised her. Jace was no longer just running or hiding. He was actively trying to outsmart her. He began leaving false trails, using decoys to confuse her and make it harder for her to track him. Vexara had always relied on her superior senses, her advanced technology, and her speed to catch her prey. But Jace was turning her own methods against her. When she realized this, a sense of respect washed over her. He was turning the hunt into a game, and for the first time, she felt that she might not be the one in control. The human's cleverness was proving to be his greatest weapon. She had never met anyone quite like him before. It was becoming clear that Jace wasn't just surviving out of luck. He was using his mind. On the fifth day, Vexara decided to test him. She decided to reveal herself just slightly, enough to give Jace a glimpse of her presence, but not enough to make him believe she was giving up. She watched from a distance as Jace paused, sensing something was wrong. He immediately went on alert, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. But Vexara was too quick. Before he could react, she was gone again, slipping back into the shadows of the forest. Jace stood still for a moment, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He knew someone was out there, but the question was, who? The realization that he was being stalked by something intelligent and capable made his heart race. But he kept his cool. If he was going to survive, he couldn't let fear control him. Over the next 2 days, Jace continued to push himself, always staying one step ahead of his invisible hunter. His body ached from the constant movement, and his mind was starting to strain, but he didn't give up. He had learned to survive on sheer willpower. There was a strength inside him that he had never fully realized before, a strength that came from within, from his desire to protect the ones he loved and to survive at all costs. As the hours turned into days, Jace began to realize something even more important. His mind was as sharp as his body. He had learned how to survive on the battlefield, how to think in the most intense situations, and how to use his environment to his advantage. It wasn't just physical strength that kept him alive. It was his ability to adapt, to change, to think on his feet. Vexera had expected the hunt to be over quickly, but with each passing day, Jace proved that he was not just a survivor. He was a force to be reckoned with. And as she watched him continue to outwit her, Vexera found herself growing more intrigued, more excited. This human was not just her prey. He was a challenge, and Vexera realized, for the first time in a long while, that she might actually lose this hunt. With each passing day, the hunt became more intense. Vexera had long prided herself on her ability to track and capture even the most elusive of prey. But Jace Winters was testing the limits of her skills. She had never faced someone like him before. The human's survival instincts were sharp, and his adaptability in the face of danger was unmatched. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to get close to him. It was as if Jace could sense her presence, as if he was always one step ahead. Vexera felt the tension building inside her, a mix of frustration and fascination. The thrill of the hunt was slowly shifting into something else, something she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just hunting for the sake of proving her superiority anymore. Now she was hunting because she wanted to know more about this human, about what made him so resilient. He was unlike any prey she had ever encountered. As Vexera silently moved through the forest, staying just out of sight, she began to notice something. Jace wasn't just running or hiding anymore. He was playing the game, trying to outsmart her at every turn. He had learned her patterns, anticipated her moves. It was almost as if he was challenging her to a battle of wits, forcing her to think in ways she hadn't before. It wasn't just about strength or speed anymore. It was about who could outthink the other. The realization hit her. Jace wasn't just surviving. He was adapting. He was learning. The hunter had become the hunted. Vexera began to feel the weight of the situation. The thrill she had once felt at the beginning of the hunt had started to fade, replaced by a growing sense of respect for the human she was chasing. She could no longer rely on her cloaking technology alone to get the upper hand. Jace was too clever for that. She needed to change her strategy, but doing so would require her to take risks she wasn't sure she was ready to take. Meanwhile, Jace was becoming more aware of the game he was playing. Each day that passed, he could feel the tension growing. And he knew that the stakes were rising. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about winning. The hunter and the prey were no longer separated by a clear line. Jace had learned to trust his instincts and his mind. And now he was using both to stay one step ahead. The human's sharp eyes caught the smallest of movements in the distance, a subtle disturbance in the trees that he knew wasn't natural. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, the familiar sensation of being hunted once again. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He had become used to the feeling, and now it was something he could use to his advantage. Every sound in the forest, every movement of the wind, every shift in the atmosphere became a clue. He wasn't just waiting for the huntress to make her move. He was making his own. As the sun set on the fourth day of the hunt, Jace felt the tension in the air grow thick. He knew that Vexera was closing in on him. He could sense her presence, just out of reach, watching, waiting for him to slip up. But Jace wasn't about to make that mistake. He had learned to move like the shadows, to blend into the forest and become part of the landscape. He didn't need to see her to know she was there. He only had to feel her. The hunt was reaching its boiling point, and neither Vexera nor Jace was willing to give an inch. The game had changed, and now it was a matter of who could hold their nerve the longest. Would the alien huntress finally catch her human prey, or would Jace continue to outwit her, turning the tables once and for all? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. The hunt was far from over. By the sixth day, the air in the forest had grown thick with tension. Vexera, though confident in her abilities, could feel the hunt slipping away from her grasp. Jace Winters was proving to be more of a challenge than she had ever expected. She had been careful, methodical, staying hidden in the shadows, but now she began to feel the strain of the long chase. Her body, though enhanced by her species' technology, was not made for endless pursuit. She was starting to grow tired, but she refused to give up. Jace, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in the danger. He was always on the move, always thinking, always adapting. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Vexera decided it was time to make her move. She could feel Jace's presence ahead of her. He had slowed down, perhaps out of exhaustion, or to set another trap. This time, she would catch him. She crept through the trees, her heart racing with excitement. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She activated her cloaking device and crept closer, her every movement calculated and precise. She had learned to anticipate his behavior, and she was certain she had him now. But as she neared, she suddenly felt something shift in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She had underestimated Jace. He had expected her to come this way. In an instant, the ground beneath her feet gave way, and Vexera found herself caught in a snare she hadn't seen coming. A net of thick vines and sharp spikes held her fast, trapping her in a deadly grip. The hunter had been caught in her own game. Panic flitted through her as she struggled to free herself, but it was too late. Jace, who had been waiting in the shadows, stepped into view. His face was calm, his eyes alert, but there was no fear in him. He had known she would make her move. As he walked toward her, Vexera's mind raced. She had been so close. She had been certain that this time she would catch him. But now, it was Jace who stood in control. "You're good," Jace said, his voice steady, but with a hint of admiration. "But not good enough." Vexera glared at him, her pride stinging. She had never been caught in a trap before, especially not by prey like Jace Winters. But she wasn't ready to surrender yet. She had one last trick up her sleeve. With a quick motion, she activated her plasma whip, a weapon of advanced technology designed to slice through anything in its path. It crackled to life, a glowing blue blade of energy that could cut through steel. Jace stepped back, his eyes narrowing. He had known she wouldn't give up easily. As the whip lashed out, he ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade. But Vexera's struggle only seemed to make her situation worse. She had underestimated how strong the net was, and now she was wasting her energy trying to break free. Jace could see the frustration in her eyes. She had been the one hunting him. But now, it was her who was trapped. "You should have learned by now," Jace said, his voice cool but with a note of finality. "I'm not someone you can outsmart." Vexera gritted her teeth, still trying to escape, but she could feel her strength fading. She had been outplayed. Jace, ever the strategist, took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. There was no fear in him, only the quiet confidence of someone who had faced danger and come out on top. The tables had truly turned. As Vexera lay trapped in the net, the weight of her situation finally began to sink in. She had made a mistake, underestimated her prey. And now Jace Winters had the upper hand. Her pride, which had once been her greatest asset, was now a heavy burden, and she realized she had allowed her arrogance to cloud her judgment. Jace stood before her, calm and collected, his eyes never leaving hers. His confidence was unmistakable, and for the first time in their long hunt, it was clear that he was in control. Vexera struggled one last time, but the net was too strong. Her enhanced strength, her speed, and her advanced technology couldn't break free from the vines that held her fast. Jace watched her carefully, making sure she wouldn't try anything else. He had seen the weapon she wielded, the plasma whip, but he knew better than to let her use it. The moment he had caught her, he had disabled her cloaking device, ensuring that she couldn't escape undetected. The tables had indeed turned, and Jace could feel the weight of the moment. The hunter was now the hunted. "I didn't think you'd be this good," Jace said, his voice calm but with a note of respect. "You were almost a challenge, but it looks like I've got the last laugh." Vexera's eyes narrowed, her pride stinging from the words. She wasn't used to losing, especially not to someone like Jace, but she couldn't deny it. He had outwitted her at every turn. In a way, she admired him for it. As much as she wanted to fight back, to break free, Vexera knew she had no chance. She had underestimated the human's ability to think ahead, to use the environment and his mind to his advantage. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a tactician, a strategist. He had made her play his game, and she had fallen into every trap. Jace took a step closer, examining his catch with quiet satisfaction. He had studied Vexera for days, learning her movements, her behavior, her patterns. He knew when she would strike, when she would retreat, and when she would make her move. And now, after all the days of hiding and running, he had finally outsmarted her. "I've been hunting you this whole time," Jace said, crouching down to meet her gaze. "But it turns out the real hunt was for you to realize how clever I really am." Vexera's eyes burned with fury, but there was no way out. She had nothing left to fight with. Her pride, her weapons, her strategies, everything had failed her. Jace had anticipated each of her moves, and now she was nothing more than a captured prey. She had been so sure that she would be the one to win. But in the end, it was Jace who had played the perfect game. Despite her frustration, Vexera couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration for the human. His adaptability, his ability to think under pressure, had caught her off guard at every turn. It was a quality she had not seen in many species, let alone a human. For the first time since the hunt had begun, she questioned everything she had believed about humanity. They weren't just weak, frightened creatures that could be easily hunted and killed. No, they were resilient. They were clever. And they could be a worthy opponent. Jace, sensing the shift in her demeanor, took a step back. He wasn't about to underestimate her, even though she was trapped. He knew better than to think the hunt was over. But for now, the tables had turned. He had won, and Vexera was his captive. The game was no longer a one-sided pursuit. The roles had reversed. As Vexera lay trapped in the net, the realization hit her that escape was no longer an option. Her pride, her strength, her technology, none of it had been enough. She had underestimated Jace Winters, the human who had somehow turned the tables in their deadly game. For the first time in the hunt, she felt vulnerable, powerless. But something else stirred within her as she looked up at him. Something she hadn't expected. It wasn't just anger or frustration. No, there was something deeper. A sense of respect. Jace hadn't just survived. He had outsmarted her. And in doing so, he had earned her admiration. "You've done well," Vexera said, her voice low but steady. "I've never met anyone quite like you." Jace stared at her, the words sinking in. He hadn't expected her to acknowledge his skill. He had known she was tough, strong, relentless, and deadly. But this was different. She wasn't just admitting that he had bested her. She was respecting him as an equal. "I don't need your praise," Jace said bluntly. "I'm not looking for respect. I'm looking for survival." Vexera's lips curved into a faint smile. "That's what I thought," she replied, her voice still filled with the edge of someone who wasn't used to being defeated. Jace couldn't help but wonder what drove her. She was an alien, a huntress from a distant world. Her strength, her skills, they were unlike anything he had ever encountered. And yet there was a part of him that recognized something in her, a fire, a determination, a willingness to push beyond what others thought possible. Perhaps, despite their differences, they weren't so unlike after all. As Jace stood there, his eyes scanning the forest around them, he realized that the hunt had become something more than a mere contest of survival. The lines between hunter and prey had blurred. And now, something unexpected was growing between them, a mutual understanding, an unspoken connection. For the first time, Jace found himself considering a different possibility. Maybe there was a way for him and Vexara to work together. Maybe they didn't have to be enemies. He knew the risk of making such an alliance. Vexara was a fierce hunter, someone who had proven she could track him, outsmart him, and nearly kill him. But what if there was more to her than that? What if they could both benefit from each other's strengths? What if we stopped trying to kill each other? Jace said suddenly, breaking the silence. Vexara raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his suggestion. "You want to make a deal?" she asked, her tone skeptical but curious. "I'm not saying I trust you," Jace replied. "But we both know that we're not getting out of this forest without a fight. There are bigger threats out here than just us. What if we work together for a while? At least until we can find a way out of this place." Vexara's gaze hardened, but she didn't dismiss the idea outright. "You think we can trust each other?" she asked. "You've already shown me that you're capable," Jace said, his eyes meeting hers. "And I've seen what you're made of. If we don't work together, we'll both end up dead." There was a long silence between them, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Vexara considered his words carefully. She had spent so long seeing Jace as prey, but now she was beginning to see him differently. He wasn't just some weak human she could capture and kill. He was resourceful, clever, and perhaps capable of helping her survive too. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Vexara nodded. "Fine," she said, her voice still wary. "But know this, Jace Winters. If you try to double-cross me, I will hunt you down, and I will make you regret it." Jace didn't flinch. "I wouldn't have it any other way." With that, the hunt was over. For now. What lay ahead would be a new kind of challenge, one where trust and survival were just as important as strength and cunning. The forest had fallen silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jace and Vexara stood facing each other, an unspoken agreement now between them. It was a strange turn of events. Two enemies, once locked in a deadly game of cat and mouse, now bound by the necessity of survival. Jace could feel the weight of the uneasy alliance settling between them. Vexara's eyes, still sharp and calculating, studied him carefully, as if waiting for him to make the first move. He had no illusions that this was a temporary truce, but for now, working together was the only option. "We need to move," Jace said, his voice breaking the silence. "This forest's not going to stay safe forever." Vexara nodded but said nothing. She was still assessing him, considering the risks. Her pride had been bruised, and Jace could tell that despite her agreement to work together, trust would not come easily. He didn't expect it to. The forest, once a familiar hunting ground for Vexara, was now a place of uncertainty for both of them. They could sense the growing presence of something more dangerous, something far deadlier than either of them had anticipated. The other predators in the area, creatures of unimaginable size and strength, had begun to stir. Jace's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, his instincts on high alert. He knew they couldn't linger much longer. "We need shelter," he said, moving forward cautiously. "The larger predators won't wait for nightfall to hunt." Vexara was already moving beside him, her pace as fluid as ever. She didn't speak, but her action showed she was willing to follow his lead, at least for the time being. Together, they made their way deeper into the forest, seeking higher ground, hoping to stay out of sight. As they walked, Jace's mind raced. He had no idea how long this alliance would last. Vexara was a hunter, and her instincts were trained to kill. He had to remain vigilant. He couldn't let his guard down, not for a second. But there was something different about her now, something he couldn't quite place. Her earlier respect for him had seemed genuine, and though their alliance was born out of necessity, Jace couldn't ignore the fact that they were now in this together. After a few hours, they found a small defensible spot high up in the trees, where the forest spread out beneath them. The perfect vantage point, Jace thought. They could see any threats coming from a distance, and they could move quickly if necessary. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. They set up a small camp, each of them working in silence. Jace found some dried wood to start a fire, while Vexera scouted the area, keeping watch. The silence between them grew as the night drew closer, the weight of their situation pressing on both of them. In the flickering light of the fire, Jace couldn't help but glance at Vexera. She was still the same hunter, the same formidable force, but there was a shift in her demeanor. She wasn't just the alien adversary he had been running from. She was now his ally, however temporary that might be. He had expected the worst from her, but she was proving to be more than just a deadly enemy. She was resourceful, sharp, and despite her pride, pragmatic. Vexera caught his gaze and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unfriendly. Jace quickly turned his eyes back to the fire. "Nothing. Just thinking." He wasn't sure what he had expected, but Vexera didn't seem as eager to kill them as she had been when the hunt began. Instead, she was focused on their survival, just like him. It was a strange feeling, standing side by side with her, but Jace knew better than to think they were on equal footing. He couldn't trust her completely. Not yet. But for now, they were bound by a common goal: survival. As night fell, the sounds of the forest grew louder. The distant growls of unseen creatures echoed in the darkness, and Jace felt the weight of their situation growing heavier. But in this strange new alliance, there was a sense of hope, too. They had a chance. The hunt was over, for now, but survival was a whole new battle. And in that battle, Jace knew they would need each other more than they realized. The days that followed their uneasy alliance were filled with constant movement and careful planning. Jace and Vexera worked together in silence, communicating through subtle gestures and quick glances. They were far from friends, but the bond between them had grown stronger as they faced danger side by side. The forest had become a living nightmare, with massive predators closing in on them from all sides, and the once familiar landscape now felt like a battleground. But despite the danger, there was a certain rhythm to their survival. Vexera, with her enhanced senses and keen hunting instincts, was invaluable in tracking the movements of the creatures around them. Jace, with his human ingenuity and quick thinking, found ways to outwit the predators and set traps to keep them at bay. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. On the 8th day, they had made it to the edge of the forest, where the trees thinned out and a vast, open plain stretched out before them. The sky was a deep crimson, and the air felt heavy with the promise of something both new and terrifying. Jace knew they were close to the end of the forest, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them beyond the trees. Vexera stopped beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We're almost there," she said, her voice steady. "But it's not over. Whatever's out there, we'll have to face it together." Jace nodded, his grip tightening around his weapon. He could feel the weight of their situation settling in. They had survived the forest's horrors, but whatever came next was still unknown. "I know," he said quietly, "but we've made it this far. We can't turn back now." They moved forward, each step taking them closer to their uncertain future. The closer they got to the edge of the forest, the more dangerous it became. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the distance, and the ground beneath them trembled with the presence of something enormous. The creature appeared in the distance, a massive beast that towered over the landscape, its eyes glowing a fierce red. It was unlike anything they had encountered in the forest. Its size alone was enough to strike fear into even the bravest hearts. Jace and Vexera stood frozen for a moment, sizing up the creature. It was a battle they hadn't planned for, and it seemed as though their only choice was to face it head-on. Without a word, Vexera moved first, her reflexes sharp as ever. She activated her plasma whip, charging toward the beast with deadly precision. Jace, following her lead, took cover behind a nearby rock, keeping an eye on the creature's movements. The battle that followed was fierce. The beast fought with unimaginable strength, its massive claws tearing through the ground as it swiped at them with terrifying force. Vexera and Jace worked in unison, Their movements synchronized as they dodged and countered the beast's attacks, but it was clear that they were outmatched. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't seem to land a decisive blow. As the fight wore on, Jace's thoughts raced. They couldn't keep this up forever. They needed a way to end it, quickly. Then, a plan formed in his mind. He called out to Vexera, his voice loud over the roar of the battle. She darted toward the beast's face, her plasma whip crackling as she struck at its eyes. The creature let out a deafening roar of pain, thrashing wildly in an attempt to shake her off. Seizing the opportunity, Jace fired a powerful blast at the creature's weakened side, hitting it with precision. The beast staggered, then collapsed to the ground with a final, resounding crash. They had done it. The creature was dead. But as the dust settled, Jace and Vexera stood silently, the weight of the battle still heavy in the air. They had made it through the forest, survived the creatures, and defeated the massive beast. But now they faced a new question. What would happen now? They had both proven their strength, their resourcefulness, and their ability to adapt. But the alliance that had brought them here was still fragile. They had been enemies, and they had fought side by side as allies. But what would happen now that the fight was over? Jace looked at Vexera, his expression serious. "We've survived together," he said slowly. "But that doesn't mean we have to keep going together. What's next for us?" Vexera's gaze met his, her eyes thoughtful. She had been thinking about the same thing. The hunt was over, and for the first time, she didn't have the answer. They stood there, both of them uncertain of what came next. The decision was theirs to make. Would they continue to fight for survival, or would they part ways, each of them going their separate paths? The future, it seemed, was as uncertain as the hunt had been. But one thing was clear. They would always remember the bond they had formed in the heat of battle, and that was something neither of them would ever forget.